I am Mackenzie Wilson, 29 years old, and at my sister Lauren's wedding, I was invisible to the groom's father. Despite being maid of honor, Richard Davis looked through me like I was a ghost. I wore the black dress Lauren insisted on for bridesmaids, feeling like a shadow at her perfect day. But when the MC announced my full name as I approached the microphone for my speech, Richard's face transformed. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Stick around to hear how my name at my sister's wedding unearthed a 25-old secret. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below while I take you back to where it all began. Lauren and I have always been close despite our 5-year age gap. Growing up in Rochester, New York, we shared everything from clothes to secrets. I protected her from playground bullies and she kept me grounded when my teenage rebellion phase hit hard. Our bond remained unbreakable even when I moved to Boston for college and she stayed in New York for fashion school. When Lauren called me 3 years ago, breathless with excitement about meeting someone special at a charity gala, I knew this was different from her previous relationships. Ethan Davis wasn't just another guy, he was the heir to Davis Real Estate Development, one of the largest commercial development companies on the East Coast. Their courtship was a whirlwind of helicopter rides to the Hamptons, front row seats at New York Fashion Week, and weekends in Paris. Lauren, always down to earth despite her sophisticated taste, seemed swept away but genuinely happy. "You have to meet him, Kenzie," she gushed over the phone. "He's nothing like what you'd expect from someone with his background. He volunteers at a homeless shelter every month and knows all the security guards' kids' names." 6 months into their relationship, Lauren invited me to join them for dinner at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan to meet Ethan's parents. I remember feeling nervous as I entered Del Posto, adjusting my navy cocktail dress and wishing I'd worn something more impressive. Ethan stood immediately when I approached the table, his smile genuine as he hugged me. "The famous sister I've heard so much about," he said warmly. Charlotte Davis, Ethan's mother, was elegant in her understated Chanel suit but surprisingly warm. She squeezed my hand and said, "Lauren talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." But Richard Davis barely looked up from his menu when I was introduced. Tall and imposing with silver hair and steel blue eyes, he offered a curt nod and immediately turned to the waiter to discuss wine selections. Throughout dinner, he directed his questions to Lauren or spoke with Ethan about business matters, effectively cutting me out of the conversation. When I mentioned my work as an environmental lawyer, hoping to find common ground, Richard glanced at his watch. "Interesting," he said flatly before turning to ask Lauren about her boutique's expansion plans. Later that night, I called Lauren from my hotel room. "I don't think your future father-in-law likes me very much." "Don't take it personally," Lauren assured me. "Dad's just old-fashioned and serious about family connections. Once he gets to know you better, he'll warm up." But he never did. Through engagement parties, holiday gatherings and wedding planning sessions, Richard maintained a polite but unmistakable distance. He would enter rooms and greet everyone individually, except me. During discussions about wedding details, he would reference Lauren's family rather than using our names, as if keeping us at arm's length. I threw myself into helping with wedding preparations, determined to be supportive despite feeling unwelcome around Richard. Lauren had chosen the plaza for her December wedding, and everything was extravagant ice sculptures, thousands of white roses, a 10-piece orchestra. I spent hours helping her select invitations, tasting cakes, and finalizing seating arrangements. "Are you sure you want black bridesmaid dresses?" I asked as we flipped through designer lookbooks. "It seems a bit somber for a wedding." Lauren squeezed my hand. "It's winter in New York, and black is classic. Everyone looks good in it. Plus, you'll stand out as my maid of honor with that diamond brooch I got you." The tension peaked at the rehearsal dinner at Daniel. I had prepared a heartfelt toast celebrating Lauren and Ethan's relationship. When I stood to speak, Richard was engaged in a hushed conversation with a business associate, his back half turned to me. "To my sister Lauren," I began, raising my glass. "My best friend since the day she was born." Everyone listened attentively, except Richard, who continued his conversation as if I wasn't speaking. Charlotte noticed and nudged him, but he merely glanced up, nodded vaguely, and resumed talking. The slight was so obvious that several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. After the dinner, our mother Abigail pulled me aside in the restaurant's elegant foyer. She looked unusually tense, her fingers fidgeting with her pearl necklace. "Don't worry about Richard," she said, her voice low. "Some people just take longer to warm up to new family members." "Mom, it's been 3 years," I pointed out. "This isn't taking longer, he actively avoids me." "Did I do something to offend him?" A strange expression crossed her face, something like guilt mixed with worry. "Of course not, sweetheart. Just focus on making the wedding perfect for Lauren. That's what matters. I noticed she avoided looking directly at Richard when he passed by with Charlotte, and he did the same. Something wasn't right, but with the wedding just 2 days away, I decided to let it go for Lauren's sake. That night in my hotel room, I lay awake wondering what invisible barrier stood between me and Richard Davis, never imagining that by the end of the wedding, a glass would shatter along with the secrets of my very identity. The morning of Lauren's wedding dawned crisp and clear, sunlight sparkling off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. The plaza's bridal suite buzzed with activity as hairstylists, makeup artists, and the photographer moved about while Lauren's 6 bridesmaids sipped mimosas and helped each other into their black gowns. I stood by the window, watching Central Park transform into a winter wonderland, memories flooding back. Lauren at 6, crying when I left for my first sleepover. Lauren at 16, both of us staying up all night after her first heartbreak eating cookie dough straight from the package. Lauren at 21, cheering loudest at my law school graduation. Earth to Mackenzie, teased Brianna, one of the bridesmaids, getting cold feet as maid of honor. I smiled, turning back to the room. Just taking it all in. This day has been coming for so long, and now it's here. Our mother Abigail entered carrying a tray of breakfast pastries from the hotel kitchen. She looked elegant already in her pale blue mother of the bride dress, but I noticed tension around her eyes. "Have you seen Dad?" I asked, taking a croissant. "He's meeting with the officiant to review some details," she said, setting down the tray. "He'll join us before the ceremony." I noticed she kept glancing at her phone, seeming distracted. When Lauren's phone rang with Ethan's mother calling, Abigail nearly jumped. "Charlotte wants to know if we'd like to join them for breakfast downstairs," Lauren announced after answering. "You girls go ahead," Abigail said quickly. "I still need to steam my dress." I watched curiously as relief washed over her face when Lauren decided to stay in the suite instead. Something was definitely off with my mother, and it seemed connected to Richard's presence. During the breakfast downstairs with some of the wedding party, I sat with Jessica, one of Lauren's college friends who'd been helping with wedding preparations. "The strangest thing happened yesterday," Jessica mentioned between bites of avocado toast. "Ethan's father cornered me at the rehearsal dinner and started asking questions about you." I nearly choked on my coffee. "About me? What kind of questions?" "Where you grew up, where you went to school, stuff about your childhood." I thought maybe he was planning some kind of surprise for the speeches, but he seemed intense. Before I could process this information, the breakfast was interrupted when Richard himself appeared, requesting a private word with Lauren. My sister looked surprised but followed him to a quiet corner of the restaurant. Through the potted palms, I could see Richard speaking earnestly, his hands gesturing as Lauren's expression shifted from confusion to concern. When she returned 10 minutes later, her eyes were slightly reddened. "Everything okay?" I asked quietly as she slid back into her seat. "Fine," she said with a forced smile. "Just some last-minute family business stuff." But I could tell something was wrong. Lauren had always been a terrible liar. Her left eyebrow twitched slightly whenever she wasn't telling the full truth. A tell I'd recognized since we were children. Back in the bridal suite, the final preparations accelerated. As the makeup artist worked on Lauren's face, I received a text from our father. "Running late. Traffic from airport. We'll be there by 12:30. I frowned at my phone. Dad was never late for important events, and he'd flown in from Chicago 2 days ago. Why would he be coming from the airport? While the stylist was curling my hair, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took a detour past Richard and Charlotte's suite. Determined to understand why he was asking questions about me, the door was ajar and I could hear Richard's voice, tense and urgent. "It has to be addressed, Charlotte. I can't just ignore this." "Not today," Charlotte's soothing voice replied. "This is Ethan's wedding day. Whatever this is about Mackenzie, it can wait." I froze at the sound of my name. So this wasn't just my imagination, there was something specific about me that bothered Richard. I knocked lightly and pushed the door open, finding Richard and Charlotte standing near the window, both looking startled at my appearance. "Sorry to interrupt," I said, feigning casualness. "Lauren was wondering if you had the groom's cake topper. The bakery delivered it to you by mistake." It was a lie, but I needed an excuse to gauge Richard's reaction to me directly. Charlotte started to respond, but Richard cut her off. "We don't have it. Check with the wedding planner." His tone was curt, dismissive. He turned away immediately, effectively ending any potential conversation. As I left, I heard him speak in low tones to someone on his phone. "She looks exactly like her. This can't be a coincidence. This is a nightmare." My heart pounded as I walked back to the bridal suite. Who did I look like? What nightmare was he referring to? The question swirled in my mind as I rejoined the bridal party, pasting on a smile while uneasiness settled deep in my stomach. Something significant was happening beneath the surface of this wedding, and, somehow, I was at the center of it. St. Patrick's Cathedral stood majestic against the winter sky, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven as guests filed in beneath the archways. Inside, thousands of white roses and lilies transformed the sacred space into a fragrant garden. Their perfume mixing with burning candles and polished wood, crystal-draped candelabras lined the center aisle, and a string quartet played softly as ushers in black tuxedos guided guests to their seats. I waited with Lauren and the other bridesmaids in the vestibule, my hands shaking slightly as I adjusted her cathedral-length veil. Lauren looked breathtaking. Her custom Vera Wang gown with its hand-beaded bodice and flowing train made her look like she'd stepped from the pages of a fairy tale. "Dad's cutting it close," Lauren whispered, checking the time on a nearby clock. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 15 minutes, and Thomas Wilson was nowhere to be seen. "He'll be here," I assured her. Though my own anxiety was building. Not only about our father's arrival but about the undercurrent of tension I'd sensed all morning. The wedding coordinator appeared, elegant in her black suit. "Everyone's seated, and the groom's family has just taken their places in the front pew." I peered through the crack in the massive wooden doors. From my vantage point, I could see Richard and Charlotte seated in the front row on the right side. Richard sat rigidly, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Even at this distance, I could feel his discomfort. Just as the bridesmaids were lining up to begin the processional, our father burst through the side door, slightly out of breath but impeccably dressed in his tuxedo. "Sorry, Princess," he said, kissing Lauren's cheek. Traffic was a nightmare. He turned to hug me, and I noticed something unusual, a faint smell of whiskey on his breath. Dad rarely drank before evening. And never before important events. "Dad, are you okay?" I whispered. Fine," he said, straightening his bow tie. "Just needed a little liquid courage. It's not every day you give your daughter away." Before I could question him further, the coordinator signaled for the procession to begin. The massive cathedral doors opened, and the string quartet transitioned to Pacheco Bell's canon. One by one, the bridesmaids began their measured walk down the aisle. As maid of honor, I was the last before Lauren. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, clutching my bouquet of white roses and eucalyptus. The cathedral's grandeur momentarily overwhelmed me. Hundreds of faces turned to watch my progress. The vaulted ceiling soaring overhead, light streaming through stained glass windows. I kept my eyes forward, but as I approached the altar, I couldn't help glancing at Richard. What I saw sent a chill through me. He was staring at me with an intensity that felt almost hostile, his face drained of color. When our eyes met, he physically recoiled, turning to whisper something to Charlotte, who placed a restraining hand on his arm. The moment was brief, but unmistakable. I continued to my place at the altar, struggling to maintain my composure. Aware of a confusion of emotions, anger, hurt, and increasingly, curiosity. What possible reason could this man have for such a visceral reaction to me? The wedding march began, and all attention turned to Lauren on our father's arm. I watched Dad's face as he walked Lauren down the aisle, noticing how his eyes carefully avoided Richard's until they reached the altar. When Thomas shook Ethan's hand, passing Lauren to her groom, I saw him and Richard exchange a look loaded with unspoken meaning. Throughout the ceremony, I found myself distracted by the strange undercurrents flowing between our families. While Ethan and Lauren exchanged heartfelt vows, Richard kept his gaze fixed firmly on the officiant, never once looking in my direction. Our father, normally stoic, seemed unusually emotional, his hands trembling slightly when he took his seat beside our mother. After Lauren and Ethan were pronounced husband and wife, the recessional began. In the traditional pairing of best man and maid of honor, I found myself walking beside James, Ethan's college roommate. As we approached the front pew where Richard and Charlotte stood, I noticed Richard physically step away, creating unnecessary distance as we passed. The slight was so obvious that James noticed, raising an eyebrow at me questioningly. I gave a small shrug, embarrassed, but increasingly determined to understand what was happening. Outside the cathedral, as guests mingled before departing for the reception, the photographer began organizing family portraits on the steps. "Let's have the bride's family first," he called out, positioning Lauren and Ethan in the center. Our parents moved forward, and I followed, taking my place beside my mother. The photographer was about to click when Richard's voice cut through the chatter. "Perhaps we should just do immediate family first," he suggested. His tone light, but his meaning clear. I wasn't included in his definition of immediate family. Lauren frowned. Mackenzie is my immediate family, she said firmly. My only sister and maid of honor. An awkward silence fell over the group as Richard's suggestion hung in the air. Charlotte touched her husband's arm, murmuring something that made him reluctantly step into position for the photo. Throughout the photo session, Richard maintained as much physical distance from me as the groupings would allow. I caught him whispering to Charlotte several times, both of them glancing my way when they thought I wasn't looking. My frustration was building. This was my sister's wedding day. A celebration of love and family, yet I felt like an unwelcome intruder because of one man's inexplicable aversion to me. As guests departed for the reception, I helped Lauren into the vintage Rolls-Royce that would take us to the plaza. In the privacy of the back seat, I finally voiced what had been bothering me all day. Lauren. Do you have any idea why Richard seems to hate me so much? Lauren sighed, careful not to wrinkle her dress. I don't think he hates you, Kenzie. I think she hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. I think you remind him of someone. Ethan mentioned once that his dad said you look like someone from his past. Who? I pressed. I don't know, she admitted. But whatever it is, it's his issue, not yours. Please don't let it ruin today. I nodded, squeezing her hand, but inside, my determination was growing. By the end of this reception, I would confront Richard Davis and demand an explanation for his behavior. Little did I know that the answer would come sooner and more dramatically than I expected, changing everything I thought I knew about myself. The plaza's grand ballroom had been transformed into a winter wonderland that took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a warm glow over tables draped in ivory silk and centered with towering arrangements of white roses, silver-painted branches, and twinkling fairy lights. Ice sculptures of swans flanked the dance floor, and a 10-piece orchestra played softly as guests found their places. During the cocktail hour in the adjacent terrace room, I mingled with guests, accepting congratulations for my sister while maintaining a peripheral awareness of Richard's location at all times. He seemed to be employing the same strategy in reverse, always keeping a calculated distance between us, moving to a different conversation group whenever I approached. Ethan found me by the champagne fountain, looking handsome but slightly concerned in his tailored tuxedo. Everything okay with you and Dad? He asked, accepting 2 glasses from a server and handing one to me. I noticed some tension during photos. I considered deflecting but decided on honesty. I was hoping you could tell me. Your father has been avoiding me since the day we met. Today it seems worse than ever. Ethan frowned, his eyes searching the room until he located his father in conversation with business associates. I honestly don't know what's going on. He's been acting strange for weeks. Especially after he found some old letters in my grandfather's study during renovations. But he refuses to talk about it. Letters? I prompted. Something from the past. Mom said they dated back to before I was born. He shrugged apologetically. Whatever it is, I'm sorry if he's making you uncomfortable. Today should be about celebration, not awkwardness. As Ethan was called away by the best man, I spotted my mother standing alone near a massive ice sculpture, looking uncharacteristically tense as she sipped her champagne. I made my way to her, determined to get answers. Mom, what's going on with Richard Davis? I asked without preamble, and don't tell me I'm imagining things or that he's just reserved. Something specific is happening. And I think you know what it is. Abigail Wilson had always been composed and forthright, but now she avoided my eyes, taking another sip of champagne before responding. Sweetheart, this is your sister's wedding day. Let's not create drama where none is needed. That's not an answer, I persisted. There's clearly history between our families that no one is talking about. Did you and Dad know the Devises before Lauren met Ethan? A flash of alarm crossed her face before she composed herself. Of course not. What a strange question. But the slight tremor in her hand told me otherwise. Before I could press further, Margaret Thompson, my mother's oldest friend and my honorary aunt, joined us, resplendent, in emerald green. Mackenzie, darling, you look stunning, she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. Pulling back, she studied my face with an odd expression. My goodness. You look so much like your mother did at your age. It's remarkable, really. My mother abruptly excused herself, claiming she needed to check on seating arrangements, leaving me confused by her sudden departure. Did I say something wrong? Margaret asked, watching Abigail hurry away. I don't think so, I replied, processing this strange reaction. Margaret, did my mother ever know the Davis family before Lauren met Ethan? In the past, maybe? Margaret's expression turned guarded. That's really something you should discuss with your parents, dear. Old connections can be complicated. The wedding coordinator appeared, announcing that guests should begin taking their seats for dinner. I made my way toward the head table only to discover an unexpected seating arrangement. While Lauren and Ethan sat center stage with their parents, flanking them, I had been placed at a table with distant cousins and college friends, far from the main family table where the maid of honor would traditionally sit. There must be a mistake. Lauren frowned when I quietly mentioned it. I specifically requested you be seated with family. It's fine, I assured her, not wanting to cause distress on her big day. But I knew it wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately separated me from the family grouping. Across the room, I watched my father Thomas drinking more heavily than usual, his eyes repeatedly drifting to where Richard sat. The two men hadn't spoken directly all evening, maintaining a careful, cordial distance while interacting with everyone else around them. As servers presented the first course, I excused myself to retrieve Lauren's lip gloss from the bridal suite for a touch-up. In the elegant suite, I rummaged through her wedding emergency kit, a monogrammed bag containing everything from safety pins to aspirin. As I searched for the lip gloss, my hand encountered something hard at the bottom, a small, ornate silver frame. Curious, I pulled it out and found myself looking at a photograph I'd never seen before. It showed a much younger version of my mother, perhaps in her early 20s, standing with a group of people on what appeared to be a university campus. My eyes widened as I recognized one of the men in the group, younger, with darker hair, but unmistakably Richard Davis. The door opened behind me, and I turned to find my mother standing there. Her face pale as she saw what I was holding. "Where did you get this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's private," she said sharply, crossing the room to take the photo from my hands. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" "Because it looks like you and Richard Davis knew each other long before Lauren met Ethan. It looks like you've been lying to me." For a moment, I thought she might confess everything, but she simply slipped the photo into her clutch. "Now isn't the time, Mackenzie. Your sister deserves her perfect day without family complications." "What complications?" I demanded, but she was already heading for the door. "Just leave it alone," she said firmly. "Please. For Lauren's sake." I returned to the ballroom, my mind racing as dinner was served. From my peripheral vision, I noticed Richard watching me when he thought I wasn't looking. His expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't decipher. My father continued drinking, becoming uncharacteristically loud with his table mates, while my mother maintained a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. As dessert plates were cleared, the MC approached the microphone, announcing that the speeches would begin. Lauren caught my eye from the head table, giving me an encouraging smile. Despite the swirling confusion and mounting questions, I took a deep breath and prepared to fulfill my duties as maid of honor, unaware that my simple approach to the microphone was about to shatter more than just a champagne glass. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as spotlights illuminated the area around the microphone stand. The MC, a charismatic man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, tapped the microphone twice to ensure it was working. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice resonating through the ballroom, "it's time for toasts to our beautiful couple. First, we'll hear from the maid of honor, Lauren's only sister and best friend since childhood." I rose from my seat, smoothing my black dress and taking a deep breath to steady my nerves. Public speaking had never bothered me. Years of presenting cases in courtrooms had cured me of that particular anxiety, but tonight felt different. The undercurrent of tension and mystery had left me feeling unsettled. As I approached the microphone, the MC continued his introduction with the traditional formality of grand weddings. "Please welcome to the microphone, Miss Mackenzie Elizabeth Wilson." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. From the corner of my eye, I saw Richard Davis, who had been raising his champagne glass in preparation for the toast freeze. His face drained of color, so completely that for a moment I feared he might be having a heart attack. Our eyes met across the room, his wide with shock, mind confused, and then his fingers simply released their grip on the crystal flute. The glass fell, tumbling end over end. Champagne sprang in a golden arc before it shattered against the marble floor with a crash that seemed to echo in the sudden silence that had fallen over the ballroom. All eyes turned to Richard, who remained frozen, staring at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Charlotte tugged urgently at his sleeve, whispering something in his ear, but he seemed incapable of response. The spell was broken when a server hurried forward with a dustpan to clean up the broken glass. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as guests exchanged curious glances. I stood at the microphone, acutely aware that something momentous had just occurred, though I didn't yet understand what. Gathering my composure, I focused on the note cards in my hand and began my speech. My voice trembled slightly at first but grew stronger as I spoke from the heart about my sister. For 24 years, Lauren has been my best friend, my confidant, and occasionally my fashion consultant when I show up to important events in last season's shoes. This earned a gentle laugh from the audience, easing some of the tension. From building blanket forts in our living room to helping me move into my first apartment, Lauren has always been there with her infectious optimism and unwavering support. As I continued speaking about Lauren and Ethan's relationship and the beautiful future awaiting them, I was acutely aware of Richard's empty chair at the head table. He had abruptly left the room, Charlotte following close behind him. Lauren was smiling at my words but couldn't hide the concern in her eyes as she glanced toward the exit where her new father-in-law had disappeared. I concluded my speech by raising my glass to Lauren and Ethan. May your lives together be filled with the love, laughter, and adventure that have marked your relationship from the beginning. And may you always be each other's safe harbor in life's storms, just as Lauren has always been mine. Applause filled the room as guests raised their glasses. I returned to my seat, my hands shaking slightly as I set down my note cards. Before I could even take a sip of water, Charlotte Davis returned to the ballroom alone, making her way directly to me. "Mackenzie," she said quietly, her elegant composure never faltering despite the obvious tension. "I want to apologize for my husband's behavior. He's not feeling well." "Is that really what's happening here?" I challenged, keeping my voice low. "Because it seems like there's something about me specifically that's upsetting him." Charlotte hesitated, conflict evident in her expression. "It's complicated. Family matters often are, but we're not family," I pointed out. "At least, not until today." Something in her eyes, a flash of what might have been pity or perhaps guilt, made my stomach tighten. Before she could respond, Lauren appeared at my side, her wedding gown rustling softly. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between us. "Where's Richard? Is he okay?" "Just a touch of something," Charlotte assured her with practiced grace. "He'll be back shortly. He wouldn't miss your first dance for the world." But the concern in Lauren's eyes deepened. "And the glass?" That wasn't just feeling unwell. Before Charlotte could formulate another polite evasion, I decided enough was enough. "Your father-in-law had that reaction when the MC announced my full name," I told Lauren directly. "And I'm going to find out why." I excused myself and headed toward the exit, determined to confront Richard. In the grand corridor outside the ballroom, I spotted Ethan engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with his father near a massive flower arrangement. I slowed my approach, not wanting to interrupt, but close enough to overhear their exchange. "Dad, you need to pull yourself together," Ethan was saying, his back to me. "Whatever this is about, it's my wedding day." "You don't understand," Richard replied, his voice unsteady. "That name? Elizabeth. It can't be a coincidence. Not with how much she looks like." He stopped abruptly, noticing me standing several feet away. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, Richard looking haunted, me confused and increasingly angry. Ethan turned, surprised to see me. "Mackenzie," he began, but I cut him off. "I think your father owes me an explanation," I said firmly, stepping closer. "All day now. For 3 years, he's been treating me like I'm invisible or somehow offensive to him. And now this reaction to my name? What's going on?" Richard seemed to struggle for words, opening his mouth and then closing it again. Before he could respond, a hotel staff member approached to inform Ethan that the band was ready for the first dance. With visible reluctance, Ethan excused himself, promising to return quickly and shooting his father a pointed look that clearly said, "Fix this." Left alone in the corridor with Richard Davis, I crossed my arms and prepared for answers, never imagining how completely they would shatter the foundations of my identity. Richard Davis looked nothing like the confident, commanding figure who had dominated boardrooms and charity galas for decades. In the soft lighting of the hotel corridor, away from the celebration in the ballroom, he seemed suddenly older, uncertain. "Perhaps we should step somewhere more private," he suggested, glancing at hotel staff passing by. "No more delays," I insisted. "Whatever this is about, I deserve to know. Now." He nodded slowly, gesturing toward a small terrace off the corridor. Outside, the winter air bit at my exposed shoulders, but I barely noticed the cold. The New York skyline glittered around us. Snow falling gently onto the terrace's stone railing. "Why have you been avoiding me?" I asked directly. "What is it about me that bothers you so much?" Richard walked to the railing, staring out at the city lights. For a moment, I thought he might refuse to answer, but then he spoke, his voice barely audible. "You have her eyes. And her middle name." "Whose eyes? Whose name?" I pressed, moving to stand beside him. He turned to face me and I was startled to see tears in his eyes. Your mother's? You have Abigail's eyes and Elizabeth was her middle name. My confusion must have shown on my face because he continued, words coming faster now. I knew your mother before she met Thomas. We were engaged, briefly. Boston University, 1992. The photograph I'd found suddenly made sense, a younger Richard and my mother on a college campus. But this couldn't explain his extreme reaction to me. Plenty of people had former relationships before marriage. So you dated my mother in college, I said slowly. That doesn't explain why you've treated me like a pariah for 3 years. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, visibly struggling. It wasn't just dating. We were in love, or at least, I thought we were. My family. He paused, seeming to gather himself. My family didn't approve. The DeVises had expectations. Abigail came from a modest background, teaching aspirations. My father threatened to cut me off, remove me from the company's succession plan. And you chose the family business over love, I concluded, still not understanding the connection to me. Yes, he admitted, the word heavy with regret. The single greatest mistake of my life. I told Abigail we needed to end things, that we had different paths. She was devastated. Left Boston that week. I never saw her again until Lauren brought Ethan home. And there she was, Thomas Wilson's wife. The pieces were starting to align, but I still didn't see how this justified his treatment of me. That was nearly 30 years ago. Why take it out on me? Richard turned fully toward me now, his expression intense. Because I found letters, Mackenzie. Letters Abigail wrote to me after she left Boston. Letters my father intercepted and hid in his study. Letters I never knew existed until we renovated the house last month. My heart began to pound as understanding dawned. What did the letter say? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She was pregnant when she left, he said quietly. She tried to tell me, but the letters never reached me. By the time I found them, she was already married to Thomas. The timing? He hesitated, then continued more firmly. The dates in those letters align perfectly with your birth, Mackenzie Elizabeth Wilson. And you look exactly like my mother at your age. I have photos of her in her 20s. The resemblance is uncanny. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I gripped the stone railing for support, snow melting beneath my fingers as I processed what he was saying. Are you claiming to be my biological father? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. I believe I am, he replied simply. I've suspected since I found the letters. But seeing you today, hearing your full name announced, Elizabeth was my mother's name. Abigail and I had once talked about naming a daughter after her. My mind raced through implications and questions. If what he was saying was true, then my father, Thomas Wilson, the man who had raised me, taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, walked me through law school graduation, wasn't biologically related to me. And Ethan, my new brother-in-law, was actually my half-brother, I whispered aloud. Ethan would be my half-brother. Which means Lauren married. Not a blood relative, Richard quickly clarified. There's no biological connection between Lauren and Ethan. The terrace door opened behind us and I turned to find my father, Thomas Wilson, standing there, his face grim in the moonlight. I've been looking for you, he said, his eyes moving between Richard and me. Charlotte told me what happened. Did you know? I demanded, my voice breaking. All this time, did you know I wasn't biologically yours? The pain that flashed across his face answered before his words did. Yes, he admitted quietly. I knew. Tears burned my eyes as betrayal cut deep. How could you keep something like that from me? My entire life has been built on a lie. Thomas stepped forward, but I backed away, bumping against the stone railing. It wasn't a lie, Kenzie, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You are my daughter in every way that matters. From the moment I met your mother, when she was already carrying you, I loved you both. We decided together that I would be your father in every sense of the word. You should have told me the truth, I insisted, tears now streaming down my face. I had a right to know. Yes. Thomas agreed, surprising me. You did. We thought about telling you many times over the years, but the right moment never seemed to come. And then Lauren met Ethan. And suddenly it became much more complicated. Does Laura know? I asked, suddenly horrified at the thought that my sister might have been keeping the secret as well. No. Both men said simultaneously. We never told her, Thomas continued. We thought it would be easier that way. Easier? I repeated incredulously. Well, it certainly hasn't been easier today, has it? My sister just married my biological half-brother's son, and nobody thought to mention the connection. The door opened again, and Lauren appeared, still in her wedding gown, with Ethan beside her. Her eyes widened at the tableau before her, me in tears, both fathers looking grim. "What's going on?" she demanded. "The band is playing. Guests are asking questions, and half the wedding party has disappeared." The four of us looked at each other in frozen silence, the weight of decades of secrets hanging in the air between us. Finally, Richard spoke. "There's something you both need to know," he said, addressing Lauren and Ethan. "Something we should have told you before the wedding." As Richard began explaining, I watched my sister's expression transform from confusion to shock to disbelief. Ethan put a protective arm around her, his own face reflecting similar emotions. "So you're saying?" Lauren struggled to articulate the implications. "Mackenzie is actually your biological daughter, which makes her and Ethan half-siblings," Ethan finished, looking as though the ground had shifted beneath him as well. "But we're not related," Lauren clarified quickly, looking between Ethan and me. "Genetically, I mean." "No," Thomas confirmed. "There's no blood relation between you and Ethan." A strange laugh bubbled up from Lauren's throat, not amusement, but the release of tension. "Well, that's something, at least. Though I'm not sure how to feel about being my sister's sister-in-law and step-niece simultaneously." Her attempt at humor broke some of the tension. But the magnitude of the revelation couldn't be brushed aside so easily. We all stood in awkward silence until the wedding coordinator appeared, politely but firmly informing us that guests were waiting for the couple's first dance. "We should get back," Lauren said, looking to Ethan, who nodded agreement. "This conversation isn't over," I said, wiping tears from my cheeks. "But Lauren's right. Tonight is about your wedding. We shouldn't ruin it with family drama, no matter how significant." As Lauren and Ethan returned to their guests, I found myself alone with both fathers, the man who raised me and the man whose DNA I carried. Looking between them, I felt a maelstrom of emotions. Anger, confusion, a strange sense of connection to Richard that I'd never felt before, and the solid, familiar love for Thomas that couldn't be erased by biological revelations. "I need time to process this," I told them both. "But I have one question that needs answering now. Does my mother know you found those letters, Richard?" Richard shook his head. "I've barely spoken to Abigail today. I wasn't sure how to approach her after discovering the truth." "Then we need to find her," I said firmly before she hears this from someone else. As we re-entered the ballroom, where Lauren and Ethan were now beginning their first dance to Ella Fitzgerald's At Last, I spotted my mother standing near the dance floor, watching with tears in her eyes. She looked up as we approached, her expression changing to alarm, as she registered the grim determination on our faces. In that moment, as At Last played ironically in the background, I realized that the truth, however painful and complicated, was finally emerging after 29 years of silence. And while I didn't know what that truth would mean for our newly blended family, I knew there was no going back to the blissful ignorance of just hours ago. The remainder of Lauren and Ethan's wedding reception unfolded in a strange dreamlike state. Outwardly, the celebration continued. The cake was cut, bouquets were tossed, and champagne flowed freely. But our newly connected families moved through these traditions in a daze, performing the expected roles while processing the revelation that had turned our understanding of ourselves upside down. My mother had gone pale when Richard, Thomas, and I approached her with the truth about the letters. She led us to a quiet corner of the ballroom, behind a massive ice sculpture that afforded some privacy, and confirmed everything with a simple nod and tears in her eyes. "I tried to tell you," she said to Richard, her voice barely audible above the music. "3 times I wrote to you. When the letters went unanswered, I assumed you wanted nothing to do with me or the baby. Now, as the celebration wound down in the early hours of the morning, I found myself sitting alone at an abandoned table watching the few remaining guests say their goodbyes. The massive ballroom, so vibrant hours earlier, looked tired in the dimmed lighting, wilting flowers, discarded champagne glasses, scattered confetti on the dance floor. A movement caught my eye, my mother approaching. Still elegant in her blue dress, despite the late hour. She sat beside me, neither of us speaking for several moments. "I owe you an explanation," she finally said. Her hands clasped tightly on the table. "Yes," I agreed, neither accusatory nor forgiving. "You do." She took a deep breath, seeming to organize her thoughts. "I was 22 when I met Richard in Boston. He was charming, brilliant, from a world so different from mine. When we got engaged, his family made it very clear I wasn't welcome. But we were young and in love. We thought that was enough." She paused, looking out at the empty dance floor. "When he ended things, I was devastated. And then, I discovered I was pregnant with you. I wrote to him, believing he deserved to know, even if he'd chosen his family's expectations over our relationship. And when he didn't respond? I prompted. I moved home to Rochester, heartbroken. That's where I met Thomas. He was kind, steady, everything Richard hadn't been in the end. When I told him about my pregnancy, he didn't hesitate. He said he'd love you as his own. So you never planned to tell me the truth. I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice. She reached for my hand. We talked about it many times over the years. Thomas always said it should be my decision. As time passed, it seemed cruel to disrupt your relationship with the only father you'd ever known. Her eyes filled with tears. I made the choice I thought would protect you, Kenzie. I never imagined Lauren would end up marrying into the Davis family. Life has a strange sense of humor. I agreed, feeling some of my anger dissolve at the genuine remorse in her expression. Are you going to take a DNA test? She asked quietly. I considered the question. Looking across the room, I saw Thomas in conversation with a server helping to locate a guest's lost purse, always thoughtful, always dependable. I don't know, I answered honestly. Would it change anything? Thomas is my dad in all the ways that matter. Yes, he is, my mother agreed, squeezing my hand. But Richard is also part of who I am, I continued, surprising myself with the admission. I can see it now. We have the same chin, the same way of gesturing when we speak. It's strange to suddenly find these connections. Before my mother could respond, Thomas approached our table. Mind if I join you, ladies? He asked, his voice gentle. I nodded, making room for him. The three of us sat in silence for a moment. Our small family unit trying to find its footing in this new reality. I want you to know something, Thomas said, looking directly at me. Finding out about you was the best thing that ever happened to me. From the moment your mother told me she was pregnant, I never thought of you as anything but my daughter. Biology doesn't make a father, love does. Tears welled in my eyes. But you lied to me all these years. Yes, he acknowledged, not defending himself. We did, and I'm sorry for that. If I could do it over, I'd have told you the truth when you were old enough to understand. I know who my father is, I said firmly. It's the man who taught me to ride a bike, who quizzed me on law school exams, who walked me down countless school corridors on the first day of class. DNA can't change that. Relief washed over Thomas's face, and he reached for my hand. The three of us sat together, a family altered but not broken by truth. Across the ballroom, I noticed Richard watching us, keeping a respectful distance. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod of understanding. This night had been a revelation for him too, discovering the daughter he never knew he had, while simultaneously realizing he had no claim to the role Thomas had filled for 29 years. Lauren and Ethan approached, having changed from their wedding attire into more comfortable clothes for their departure to their honeymoon. Some wedding, Lauren said with a weak smile. Not exactly the family merger we expected. Are you okay? I asked her, concerned about how this revelation had affected her big day. She shrugged, her typical pragmatism asserting itself. It's weird, definitely. But Ethan and I talked it through. We're not related by blood and now we have an interesting story to tell our kids someday. She smiled more genuinely. Besides, now I can officially claim I have the world's most complicated family tree. Ethan put his arm around her. We decided not to let this change anything between us. We're still us. The rest is just logistics. Their resilience reminded me why I'd always admired my sister. Lauren had a gift for accepting life's curveballs with grace and even humor. As the newlyweds prepared to leave, the remaining family members gathered to see them off. For the first time, Richard, Charlotte, my parents, and I stood together as a strangely connected unit. The awkwardness was palpable but somehow less threatening than before the secret was out, for better or worse. After Lauren and Ethan departed in a shower of rose petals, the emptied ballroom fell quiet. I found myself on the dance floor with Richard, both of us hesitant but drawn to this moment of connection. I want you to know, he said carefully, that I don't expect to step into Thomas's role in your life. He earned the title of father in all the ways that matter. I nodded, appreciating his understanding. But, I'd like to get to know you, I admitted. Now that I know why you've been avoiding me all these years. A flash of shame crossed his face. I handled this terribly. When I found those letters and saw you at family events, the resemblance to my mother, to Abigail in her youth, it was overwhelming. I didn't know how to process it, so I avoided you instead. I'm sorry for that. It's a lot to take in, I acknowledged. For all of us. As the night wound to a close, our unconventional family group stood together on the steps of the plaza, watching snow fall gently on Park Avenue. Charlotte suggested breakfast the next morning, a chance to talk more, to begin understanding our new reality. In that moment, standing between the man who raised me and the man whose DNA I carried, I realized that truth, however painful or complicated, ultimately liberates. The secrets that had divided us were now in the open, creating the possibility for something new, not the fantasy of a perfect family, but the reality of imperfect people trying to connect across the divides of past choices and hidden histories. 2 weeks later, I received a small package at my Boston apartment. Inside was the silver-framed photograph I discovered at the wedding, my mother and Richard in their college days, young and in love. With it was a note from Richard. "I thought you might want this piece of your history. There's room in life for two fathers, if you're willing." I placed the frame on my bookshelf. A tangible reminder that life rarely follows the neat narratives we expect. Names Carrie Power and History Mackenzie Elizabeth Wilson now meant something different than it had before the wedding. But in that difference was a new beginning, a chance to embrace the complexity of who I truly was. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed how you see yourself? How did you handle it? Sometimes the truth is complicated, but sharing our stories helps others feel less alone. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more real-life stories, and share with someone who might need to hear that family isn't just defined by DNA, but by love, choice, and forgiveness. Thank you for listening to my story today.